We will hear argument this morning in case 2512.
Grievances we could go into with this system. I think we could be here for hours.
National Collegiate Athletic Association.
I think we have some proof, even a few years into NIL now, that people care about the logo.
There are too many people in power who have no desire to give up that power.
The NCAA's ever-shifting decisions, not stable decisions.
Does the concept of amateurism in college athletics even matter anymore?
They've capped it again without any sort of collective bargaining.
We'll finish with our unilateral decision.
All right, we're back for another episode of Unilateral Decisions. We're going to continue talking about the PCSA. Ever since this was introduced, it's been debated and discussed. And Sam, there's been some amendments to this that are being proposed, hoping to get this across the finish line, which, as we'll get to, who knows if that's even going to be possible. But why don't you go ahead and lay out some of these amendments for us?
Yeah, and really a lot of these amendments are intended to address complaints by the Big Ten and the SEC. I mean, they're the ones who are really driving the conversation right now. It really does seem like everyone kind of below them on the totem pole in college sports does, in fact, really very much support this bill and feels like the bill is overall a good thing. But the Big Ten and the SEC have a lot of complaints about, really specific to, there are a few that are kind of more governance related, but those ironically are kind of not even being addressed. The complaints that they have that are kind of more in their, specific to them, really, as we'll kind of discuss, are the two that are looking to get kind of amendments. And one of the amendments would be related to the provision in the bill that would kind of freeze conference membership and kind of prevent, schools from being able to, or really prevent the conferences from being able to continue to expand beyond where they already are. And what the kind of amendments or the proposals are kind of looking at is that instead of just outright freezing membership, at least going to the Big Ten and the SEC, I mean, the provision that would have, there's some confusion about this, but at least would have potentially targeted schools that are in the group of six that are trying to move up to the Power Five. That looks like that's going to be taken out, or Power Four that looks like it's going to be taken out. But the provision that, that freezes the Big Ten, the SEC, and the Big 12 and the ACC, at least the Big 12 and the SEC moving up to the Big 10 and the SEC, that looks like it's going to be changed to, or at least that's being talked about as being changed to, capping conference membership at 19 schools, which is a very interesting number, which I'm sure Mike will have some opinions on. If not, I will have some opinions on as well. But yeah, capping it at 19 teams, and for all schools that are not independent, which I think goes to the 19 teams, there would be a 5-year period where they have to be independent before they can move from a power conference to another power conference. So that's one of the two kind of proposals that has been reported on. The second one is related to the House settlement revenue share cap, which last year, the magic number, as I think we all know, was $20.5 million. It is calculated at 22% of average shared revenues. And what they're looking to do, and again, this is another area where I know Mike and I, and Joe, I'm sure you as well, will have some opinions on this. They're looking to add an additional about $20 million, or negotiating the finer details of it, but a retention bonus or retention pool where you can retain the players that you already have. You can use some extra money on that, and kind of a way to kind of get around this pretty strict revenue share cap. And be able to put more money into into your labor costs in that regard. So, Mike and Joe, I'm sure you guys have some opinions, so take it away.
I probably have some, but I'm dying to hear Mike go down this rabbit hole.
Well, which one do we want to start with?
Let's start with the conference cap. Another arbitrary number.
Is it arbitrary though?
No, thank you. I love this point. Yes, it is, but okay. So let's play it out. We got 19. You got 4 P4s. Okay, we're going to be at 76 when all is said and done is kind of the idea here. But I think if you look at the membership, as Sam has alluded to, so the Big Ten can add 1. Notre Dame, right? Yeah. Big Ten's going to add Notre Dame.
They want to, at least.
That's what they want to do.
I don't know if Notre Dame feels that way.
Sure, yes, fair enough. The SEC can add 3. All right. Florida State, Miami, Clemson. We're done? Is that the new SEC? And then it's all finished? Is there even another conversation to be had?
Well, replacing those schools and the
Okay.
other conferences.
Okay, sure. So then we get to add some spots in the ACC and the Big 12. And I think we go back to like figuring out who you want to be. At this point, the ACC, in this hypothetical that I don't think is all that hypothetical, has now lost 3 of their major football brands. We've talked before on this show about just like kind of having to choose who you're going to be and what you're going to be about. Does the ACC then just go raid the Big East and become a great basketball conference? Is that their move? They've still got Duke and North Carolina because they're probably not leaving. I don't see a reason unless Notre Dame says no. If Notre Dame says no to the Big Ten, then, like the dominoes fall in a different order here potentially. But
Gonzaga adds over there.
Could be.
Yeah.
Or maybe they kick out Rutgers and or another school and add like UNC and Duke or something like that. I don't know.
There's nothing college athletics fans love more than conference realignment talk. Here we are already.
Right?
Well, the PR machine's really good at this. So, I mean, we're media days. We've got SEC. We've got the Big Ten next week. I mean,
not the Pac-12.
So, yeah, I just like, I got to say that I do find it pretty funny that with all of this going down right now and the players in the room and all the stuff that's happened over the last few months, I do find it funny that with the number at 19, if that's really what's going to happen, Texas Tech is still left out of the P2 with all the different things that have happened, and they still have to be happy with being in the Big 12. I don't see any other path. Like, if we're at 19, I don't see how this is any different than the teams that we've already talked about moving, the teams that we've already said is the most likely conference realignment. Maybe that's how they landed on 19, because I can't come up with another number that makes sense or another reason that 19 makes sense. Sam, is there is there a point at 19? Like, is there something about, they're not going to allow, like, if they figure there's going to be this many X number of schools at this sort of autonomous level, that they need the power to be diluted across enough so that there's not like majority rule at some conference. Like, is there something about that? Is there some number threshold that they have to be below to where 19 makes sense? Or is it just because of the makeup that we're all expecting?
Well, see, it's funny because like it's actually half of the makeup that we're all expecting, at least for me, because, when you brought up the SEC adding Florida State, Miami, and Clemson, I'm like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense. I didn't think about that because, I think a lot of people are kind of sharing this view, but at least in my eyes, the 19 number was like, oh yeah, that's Big Ten adding Notre Dame if they're able to convince Notre Dame to go over there. Because that's so incredibly transparent. Like, why would it be one more than the Big Ten? Why is it, because you look at this from a negotiation standpoint, and clearly the Big Ten is saying, well, we want to be able to add one more school because, we're currently at 18. So why 19? That's such an awkward number. And until you realize, oh, they've been looking to get Notre Dame for years. And, Notre Dame doesn't necessarily want to go to the Big Ten. There's no indication that they would go to the Big Ten, even if this were to happen. But at least that gives the Big Ten some wiggle room to continue to negotiate with Notre Dame. And they're perfectly happy at 18 if Notre Dame decides to say no, or I throw out the very unlikely situation that they kick out of school and add Duke and North Carolina or something like that. But I really think that the clear target here is the Big Ten wants Notre Dame.
Did this all start, Sam, because there was the conversation about super conferences kind of leaving and going away? And if so, or if not, what are they saying is the reasoning behind this that is not really what we're seeing?
Oh, yeah. No, Cantwell and Cruz have been incredibly transparent about, incredibly open about the fact that this provision is to prevent a super conference. They are scared about all the talk of the Big Ten, the SEC kind of either on their own, breaking away and doing their own thing and kind of combining together to be kind of the NFL of college football, where the NFL was formed by, the AFL and the NFL deciding to join forces. And clearly there's concern about that, even if the Big Ten and the SEC are saying, well, no, that's not actually our plan. And, we could choose to believe them or not. But clearly that's what the provision is very much targeted towards. I mean, the provision is originally conceived was, even going back to the first iteration of the PCSA, and it's changed as we've talked about a few times since then. But the original iteration only very explicitly targeted the Big Ten, the SEC. It very explicitly said, we are not going to allow those conferences to expand any further. And that was very much the idea. And, I think there's the concern about the Super League, and there's also, well, Maria Cantwell, where is she from? She's from Washington. She's hearing a lot from Washington State about the Pac-12, at least in its former iteration, falling apart, and doing so because the Big Ten swooped in and took away UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington from the Pac-12. So, it's very much tailored around those concepts about, just discomfort with the idea of the Big Ten and the SEC getting bigger.
We can laugh at how they got to the number and
I will
talk about how, but doesn't this prevent this super conference, situation from happening?
Well, I mean, let's talk more about it, I guess. Is there anything in the bill, Sam, in your mind that, admittedly, I've lost a little bit of track of, like, this goes into effect if they pool rights, this doesn't, some of these things. So I'm asking for your help on this. But if it goes to 19, if both those conferences get to 19, is there anything keeping those two conferences, even if they stay disparate, from basically being the AFC and the NFC and just, like, doing their own thing?
No.
Is there anything that stops that from happening?
No, because at the end of the day, what you're talking about is much more about control of the CFP. And, the Big Ten and the SEC have control over the CFP. They can choose to really change it as much as they want. And maybe it's something that would trigger, I'm sure, like, you might see more legislation on it if they decide to do that. You might see antitrust investigations by anyone from, the conferences and schools that are left out of the picture to the Department of Justice and anything in between, probably state attorneys generals as well. But in the bill itself, there's nothing that would really necessarily prevent that at all. I mean, it prevents them from being able to expand or preventing them from being able to kind of reassign their assets to a certain degree, but they can still break away and decide to do their own thing if they wanted to do it. There's nothing in the bill, to my read, that prevents them from doing that.
So they're going to lobby for everything they want and still leave when they want to anyway. Well,
they're definitely going to leave if they don't get everything they want. That's the leverage that they have. Which, I mean, it's kind of funny. I've been laughing a little bit, about they've been begging for federal legislation for so long. They've been saying we need federal legislation for so long, and they get it, and they're like, oh well, we don't want it to be this way. But at the same time, we're seeing how much leverage they have. We're seeing that we can laugh about it, but they are very much driving the conversation because they have the political power and they have the political chips to be able to drive the conversation, because so many senators and representatives and all that are in heavily dominated SEC and Big Ten states, and they're very much interested in what the SEC and the Big Ten have to say. And if the SEC and the Big Ten say we don't support the bill, then those senators and representatives aren't going to support the bill either.
We could keep going down this rabbit hole, but I think I also want to hear from Mike on how they're proposing to increase the rev share cap and kind of the guise in which they're presenting this to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it on multiple times on this show, how this bill has been silent on employment, and I feel like this idea of a retention pool starts to actually talk about that in a way that I don't know if it's intended. We talked about Yormack saying unintended consequences a few different times. Like a retention pool, we're starting to say the quiet part out loud about employment. And I don't understand how they think that that's a good idea. We've got all these, we talked about it offline, like arbitrary caps, arbitrary limits on an industry that has absolutely no desire to abide by limits and caps. And there is legal exposure at every turn for any of these limits and caps that they're asking for or being placed upon them, because they're not being discussed. Every day that we put out one of these episodes and we hear the intro that comes on and Joe's comment about, and they've capped it again without negotiating with the athletes, like every time something else happens, we can just put that on repeat. And they keep doing it. And so now, yes, I can understand how this pool idea would be advantageous to the athletes. And so, maybe it's not something that they would necessarily stand up against, but they're not talking to them. They're not including them. They're putting an artificial limit on something. And also, what are we paying them for? What are the schools? The schools are like, and I'm somebody who sat here a few weeks ago and said that the NBA's bird rights were something that made sense if you were to get into a CBA situation so that you could incentivize athletes to stay at schools for longer. Like, I think that there's reason for it. I understand the baseline rationale behind this, like, retention concept. Completely understand it. But you're just throwing money at this problem that money has kind of created.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we want to be able to share more with the athletes. Okay, great. Yeah, we want to make sure that athletes stay here instead of just like taking the highest bid. Now they know the highest bid will come from the school that they're already at. Okay, great. For what? Like, there is no world in which the athletes that are already at your school have had their marketability double across a year for every athlete on the roster that you're now going to go throw $21 million at so you can keep $20 million to try to poach somebody else's roster. Mm-hmm. Like, what is the point of the compensation if not wages and employment, which we're trying not to talk about? What am I missing, Sam?
Not much. If anything, I mean, for one, you're absolutely spot on by saying that we are now saying the quiet part out loud. I think, me and I think a lot of people have kind of defaulted to calling the House settlement revenue share cap, and I haven't done it on this episode intentionally, even though I normally do. But we don't call it a revenue share cap; we call it a salary cap because that's what it is. It is a salary cap. We are paying these athletes salaries, and even if we're not calling them salaries, or calling this new pool of money a retention cap is just what are we doing here? Like, why are we continuing to resist the idea that these athletes are employees, that we're paying them salaries and all these kind of things? And I know the answer is why. I understand the deep fear that athletic departments have about declaring athletes employees and the administrative burdens that would be created by them. But as I think you're clearly alluding to, I mean, there's also benefits to doing that as well. If, of course, you can get them to unionize, which, that's kind of the opposite of the way unionization should work, but that's a whole another conversation. But, what I really come back to is we're imposing another cap, and that's anti-competitive. That's bad. And we're doing it under the guise of federal legislation, so it's not like it would be something where there would be antitrust problems to it, but the anti-competitive thing, I'm kind of two ways on it, where it's like, one, why are we imposing anti-competitive restraints in federal legislation? That's not necessarily the purpose of federal legislation. But also, I'm not sure I necessarily worry too much about it, at least from a labor rights and from a free market standpoint, because it's just another cap that's going to be ignored unless something happens that. Like, because, yeah, you're enshrining it in federal law, and you're presumably giving the NCAA and College Sports Commission more power to enforce this arbitrary cap. But for one, that creates constitutional problems with the private non-delegation doctrine, assuming that you're not, hereby, by asking these entities to, not asking, but deputizing these entities to now enforce federal law. That's assuming you're not now creating, making them government actors, which is a whole other litany of issues and conversations that we have not had since 1988, when the NCAA, or when the Supreme Court ruled in NCAA v. Tarkanian that the NCAA is not a state actor. But that's again, I'm at a conference and we just presented on that yesterday, so that's just fresh in my mind. But at the same time, it's this cap that's being created through federal legislation, and presumably has more power than the House settlement, has antitrust protection at the very least. But you're still not giving the NCAA subpoena power. You're still not giving the College Sports Commission subpoena power, and there's still a limit to how much they are able to do. Not even just from a logistical standpoint, which is what the subpoena power part of it's going towards, but also just from a political perspective, where. Are you, even if this becomes federal law, are you really going to punish Indiana or Notre Dame or Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia for going over the cap? And the answer is probably not.
Okay, Mike, you deal with schools throughout the country. I mean, how many schools do you think 20.5 million was just easy? Easy. 20.5 million was just easy. Like, snap your fingers. Yeah, we got that. Because now we're talking more than 20 million on top of that.
I mean, I think I can count the number on both hands, that it was easy.
So now double that.
Right. And like most, if not all of these, there are very few schools who have even tried to broach the topic of how to claw back any of that money. And I don't mean claw back from the athletes. I mean, like, monetize the rights that they have now purchased.
Yeah.
Because many of them are not looking at it as purchasing rights. Many of it are looking at it as wages, salary, whatever. And so I get that, but yeah, we're just asking for more. We're asking for a higher cap because others are already spending that much. Mm-hmm. Like, there's already rules around this in the House settlement. And we're asking for a higher cap because some people can't help themselves. I keep using that term. I've used it multiple times on this podcast. They can't help themselves. And that's what we're up against. Like, we have athletes. This is very relevant to my day job, and so I understand the bias that it sounds like I'm coming across with. However, there's a lot of very prominent athletes. I'll stick to just football, high-level football. A lot of prominent athletes who are making, reportedly, a lot of money from their schools. And they are still in such a position of leverage and power, and the dynamics are so new to everybody to try to figure out how they want to handle it, which I'm empathetic to. But everything about this is so new that these athletes are making so much money, and yet the school still feels like they can't have any sort of say over what they do. They're still so scared. They're scared of handling these athletes with anything more than just like kid gloves. And to the point that, like, there are all these ways that schools can monetize the athlete's rights just by the fact that the athlete is wearing that school's logo, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that's jerseys or, in our case, trading cards or any sort of other licensed merchandise where you're co-branding between the school marks and the athlete rights and marks and likeness. And in the pro leagues, there's players associations, and that's all. The group licensing and everything is handled by the players associations. At the collegiate level, we haven't gotten there yet. We're not matured to that point yet. However, there are ways that athletes can just, like, be a part of it. There are a lot of licensees like ourselves in the trading card space that work with specific groups to obtain those athlete rights in mass. And I cannot for the life of me understand why a school who is paying 7 figures to anyone on their football roster or men's basketball roster or women's basketball roster, how a school cannot sit there and ensure that they are able to monetize those athletes' rights in at least co-branded licensed product. Like, at the very least, how that starting quarterback is not guaranteed and required as part of his X million dollar deal to have a jersey available in the school's marks and logos that the school can then make licensing revenue off of. But they're not doing it. They are not requiring the athletes to do anything. And now we're going to pay them double. Now we're going to pay them even more. And we have 90+% of the schools having a hard time figuring out how they're paying them, to your point, what the current number is. And now we're going to pay them more. And we're not willing to ask and tell the athletes that they have to just sign a piece of paper that will allow the school to make money. It's still letting the athlete make money. I'm not even at the point where I'm talking about having the school claw back the money from the athlete and take their royalties, which I do think is a conversation that needs to be had for those who can't afford it. But regardless, the school can make royalties off of a co-branded T-shirt or jersey or what have you. They just have to have the athlete opt in and sign up and be a part of the program. And until the schools are willing to take that on themselves, there's a third party that can do that. The third party will still allow the athlete to make the money that they're able to make. But you've got a bunch of athletes acting like they're Barry Bonds and Michael Jordan and whoever else who has refused to sign, PA agreements in the past. Because of what? Because they're making so much money from the university, and the university doesn't have any control over the power dynamics of this whole situation because they're afraid to lose them for what? I don't know, but that's the situation.
Which is why they want to limit transfers?
Yeah, but
to take the fear out?
I mean, sure, yeah. There's other ways to do that.
Oh, I don't disagree, but
they don't want to. And so, okay, well, a retention pool is a great idea. Well, okay, sure. So you're going to now just sign yourself up to spend more money so that you don't lose the guy that you've already invested so much money in. But also, guess what? When that kid doesn't pan out, you're going to try to find a way to drop him off your salary roster real quick. Mm-hmm. So that's the part from the athlete side that, like, they're still not getting enough protections. They're just getting more money thrown at it. They're just getting more money thrown at those who are going to have success. And it's a gamble now. that there's this bigger pool for the athletes who do have success, but the athletes who don't find the success in year 1 or year 2 or year 3, they're actually more fragile at this point, because there's less reason for somebody to keep them, because the money that they are sitting on in year 1 of their contract with the school is money that school is going to be able to view as like new money that they're going to go out and get the new player with. Because if you have a retention pool that is specifically for keeping athletes, if an athlete who has been at your campus for 1 year, you feel like doesn't deserve any of the money out of that pool, why would you give them any of the money from the other pool that you could go spend on somebody who's not currently at your school? So, I mean, that's the actual majority of athletes, whether they want to believe it or not. And those are the people that need some sort of protection if college sports is going to be what these people purport to want it to be.
So you got $20+ million recruiting classes.
Right.
And then year 2 is where you figure out where you're going to spend.
Totally.
Well, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny because you brought up the transfer portal, and it's like, well, that they why I guess we just do this instead of instead of capping transfers if we're not able to really cap transfers. Though for one, the PCSA still does that, but in that sense, it's actually kind of brilliant. It's kind of funny in a certain degree to have this retention pool, because it allows for even if you have the one-time transfers, it allows for the very money-rich schools to be able to say, we're going to be able to protect our players, but we're still going to be able to go after other schools' players because they can't afford to dip into that retention pool because, because if they can even get to the full 20.5 million or however much it's going to after this, but it's just kind of funny in that regard, and it's kind of interesting to me, like looking at it from very much from the outside in, though I am a fan of college sports. But also as someone who studies antitrust, who studies, free markets, who studies all this kind of thing from a legal perspective, and who has studied the history of sports from kind of different, from kind of similar perspectives as well. It's the tension between economic competition and on-field competitive balance is really fascinating, and we're clearly at the point in college sports, if we haven't already been or always been at the point of this, where those two are very much clashing, because we have the ability for universities to pay athletes now directly, and they are doing so with great aplomb, and will continue to do so moving forward, as we're seeing from negotiations to open the cap up even further for the richest schools to be able to pay more and more into the athletes. It resembles a lot, like for those who are fans of Major League Baseball, the early 2000s, the Blue Ribbon panel, looking at if you read the book Moneyball, and talking about how can the Oakland A's compete with New York Yankees when the A's are spending $20 to $30 million and the Yankees are spending $200 million, and it's really kind of fascinating, because from a labor perspective, you want athletes to be able to be paid more and more and more. You want to be able to allow them to realize the full value of their labor, to be able to realize the full value of their worth, and to do that in a free market. And whether this is actually a rational free market is, I think maybe a little bit doubtful, considering that, again, where is this money coming from? It's not like you're getting donations to kind of fill in the gaps in a lot of these places where normal businesses don't necessarily have that option. It's just a very weird kind of labor space. But at the same time, it's just very, because the balance between economic competition, where you're trying to drive up labor, you're trying to drive up the value of labor, you're trying to get these athletes to be able to be paid to the level that they deserve, versus competitive balance, which is, even looking beyond Major League Baseball, is so much more prevalent here, because unless we do a thing like Major League Baseball does and do revenue sharing and do all these various different things, and now Major League Baseball is talking about not only a salary cap but a salary floor, can't do that in college sports. Definitely can't do that in college sports. Maybe if you limit it just to the top few actors, but you clearly can't do a salary floor, because a lot of schools would not be able to do that unless it was very, very low and low enough to the point where it doesn't functionally matter. And you also clearly can't do a salary cap, because we're just going to spend over that cap and there is an enforcement over it. And there's a culture of non-compliance where they're not going to abide by it. So just a very, very fascinating kind of thing from someone who has the privilege of kind of studying this as a phenomenon rather than actually having to live through it.
Well, let me ask you this, Sam. We've been talking about this for almost half an hour. Does any of our conversation even matter? Does this have any legs to pass? I mean, I've seen reports that Senator Tuberville is out there, imploring legislators not to pass the PCSA and to support his bill, which addresses, 5 for 5 and one-time transfers. So, I mean, are we having a conversation that doesn't matter in the grand scheme?
I think so. Honestly, I really do. It's not because of Tuberville.
Does it even matter?
It's not because of Tuberville. It's not because of the Tuberville proposal, right. Because as rational as that may be, and again, I kind of poo-poo having federal legislative limits on eligibility or transfers, and especially transfers. But yes, it's very clean. It's very rational. It's very specific to be able to target kind of what a lot of people in college sports see as the two biggest problems, which is the unlimited transfer portal and the and kind of lawsuits over eligibility, and kind of to crystallize that and not have to worry about all the other things that are bogging things down in negotiations is a very attractive proposal. The problem is the NCAA knows that this is their one bite of the apple. They are not going to get future legislation, and they want to cover a lot of different things. And at the same time, there are a lot of people in Congress, there are a lot of people around Congress, Democrats and labor supporters and all that, who are not going to be willing to have restraints without getting something in return. That's why we have these big mega bills. That's why we haven't been able to pass, or why it really hasn't even been discussed. I mean, Tuberville, proposed this back as a counter to the SCORE Act, let alone the PCSA. And it's just not something that ever got off the ground or ever will get off the ground, because really neither side of this equation, neither side of this very multivariable equation has incentive to pass a leaner, more focused bill. They need kind of these other things in it, and we're kind of just negotiating the margins right now. Now, are these negotiations at the margin going to be enough to actually get everyone on board with the PCSA? I think a few weeks ago when we talked about it, or at the very least, I've used this analogy a lot of times. This is we're in the end game of a game of Jenga right now, where we're pulling off pieces and we're trying to add in pieces, and at some point the whole thing, I think, is just going to fall down, because when you're dealing with this kind of massive, multivariable bill, whenever you change a variable in any kind of a negotiation like this, it becomes more complicated. It becomes more. You get more people who might oppose it. You get more people who might be unhappy with it. So, very much one of those things where I still think it's going to find a lot of difficulty passing. And we're also running up against the clock because, the midterms are coming up, and we're certainly not going to get anything before the midterms. I mean, it might hypothetically pass the Senate before then, but then it still has to go through the House, and the House, you have a lot more people who are, very adamant that there needs to be a prohibition on unemployment, which the Democrats are not going to go for, and just all these various other things as well. And it gets very, very complicated. And depending what happens in the midterms, it might get even more complicated, because if the Democrats take back the House, that's a big issue for the NCAA.
Okay. Unilateral decision time. Sam, you have to support one. PCSA or Tuberville's bill. Which one are you supporting?
If I have to, and we did talk about this. We did talk about this offline. And you said you said that we can, choose to go in any direction that we want.
Feel free.
Well, I'm gonna abide by the spirit of the question. I'm gonna stick to the spirit of the question. I think everyone knows that my answer would be no, so I'm not gonna spend time explaining why my answer would be no. I think anyone who listens to this podcast with regularity, or just knows me from social media, knows that I would probably say no to both. But if I had to choose one, it would probably be the PCSA, just because there are a lot of really good things about the PCSA, a lot of things that the Big Ten and the SEC are not happy about that aren't getting brought up in this conversation, because it's something where they've either ceded ground or they're waiting until later to kind of use their sledgehammer of political pressure to try to get out of the bill. But the private rights of action for health and safety and education, and the prohibition on arbitration clauses in NIL agreements, or at least with revenue share agreements, those are all things that are really, really positive. The way that it handles agency regulation by not giving the NCAA the power to enforce well, I mean, gives the NCAA some power to enforce agency regulation, but really just dictates what those regulations are to them, which that's fine to me to a certain extent. I mean, still not thrilled about the conflict of interest there, but at the same time, it does give one really, really crucial thing, which is a private right of action for Sparta, for the Sports Agent Accountability, Responsibility, and Trust Act, which is incredibly important. It gives athletes the right to, on their own, go after unscrupulous agents, which is something that's been very much necessary ever since Sparta was passed in the early 2000s. And there's a reason why the bill just hasn't done anything, because only the FTC right now can enforce it, and that doesn't work. And, everything I've pointed out is something that the SEC and the Big Ten would say, well, we're not eliminating, the court's influence into college sports. We're not eliminating the judicialization of sports, which is something I'm writing about right now. We're actually increasing it. But, yeah, I mean, that's a way to hold the NCAA and the schools accountable. It's a way to counterbalance the vast degrees of power that you're giving them in the PCSA. And for me, I don't think that the balance is worth it. I don't think the balance really balances out. But if you're asking me to choose between one of the two, I'd at least have that balance rather than just giving the NCAA everything it wants, even if it's just limited on transfers and eligibility.
Mike?
Wow. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go the other way, but that made me think. That definitely made me think. My thing is, I guess I would do this in that the NCAA has already more or less instituted the 5 and 5. Obviously, there's some things to get figured out specifically for this next coming year, but largely that part's already down the road. Whether it should be codified in federal bill or not, I guess is up for debate. But I think that it's low risk to if I have to vote yes on one of these.
You don't have to do anything.
Well, spirit of the question, like Sam said. So if I'm having to choose yes on one of these, I'm going to go pull my number over here with old Tommy, and I think that it's because the 5 and 5 is already more or less in place. And I would probably just be taking my chances here that the one-time transfer rule may end up being ruled unconstitutional and can't actually go into law. And so I'd hope that was going to be the outcome. So that's the game I'd be playing if I was a senator having to choose one of these two. The reason really that I wouldn't go down the PCSA road is I was thinking about this a lot over the last week, and college athletics has changed a ton. And obviously when you're in the middle of it, you feel like this huge change is all happening now. But when you zoom out, and we've done this pretty well on this podcast, I think, it has changed a lot for a long time. Mm-hmm. And there have been a ton of changes to it. And it has looked so different over the decades and over the generations. And this is not the version that I would want to codify with federal law. This is not the version of college athletics that I would say, like, whew, we finally got the bill, and it's gonna make it look like this forever. This is not the version that I would want to do. And I don't say that as a university or an athlete or anything like that. I say that as saying there's been so much change in the last 5 years and a little bit more, but 5 years for sure. So much change that the market and the powers that be have not had the proper amount of time to respond to it and allow the sort of like the waves to calm and figure out how to play in it. They're rushing to a federal solution to get the stability that they want because it's a lot right now. It's really hard to deal with right now. But I really believe that the people who have shaped it to this point should be the ones who at least get a little bit more time to try to figure it out. And whatever kind of action that requires to get people to actually do that is, I think, the reason this show exists and why we even, people are talking about this all the time. But this is not the version of college athletics that I think should be absolutely like put in stone through federal legislation. And again, it's not because it's wrong and bad and whatever. I just think that there's so much whiplash right now that has led to where it lands, like where it is today. If this were, again, cast in stone and frozen, I think it's very reactionary to what has happened in the market. And I think that if you give it a little bit more time and allow people to work towards solutions, you're going to find a little bit more middle ground that I would get to more of a place where it's like, that's what I think should be stabilized. And I think if you stabilize what it is today, I mean, we're seeing it in these negotiations. Like Sam said we're negotiating on the margins, and the margins include doubling this fake salary cap. Like I just don't think we're settled enough to say this is how it should be in federal law. So that's my take on why the PCSA shouldn't be the move.
Very fair point.
Yeah, and I was ready to walk in here and just say I'm not going to support either of them. But since you guys both went with, the spirit of the question, I feel like I have to do that as well.
It's your question.
I know. So I'm like Mike. I'm probably going to support Senator Tuberville's bill, but I'm probably doing so for a different reason. For me, I don't even like capping transfers without collectively bargaining. That aspect of college athletics. I think in modern day college athletics with NIL passing, everybody's talking about all these problems and we need to get solutions. Well, I think the people who are being impacted deserve to have a seat at the table. I've said that from day one on this show. And Tuberville's bill, to me, only caps one thing for student athletes, and to your point about giving people time to figure it out, it doesn't do anything else, and it's hopefully going to end up forcing athletes to have a seat at the table. That's by supporting Tuberville's bill. Maybe that gives some calm. Maybe that provides a little bit of time for schools to say, okay, we don't need to be focused on recruiting our roster every single year and retaining our roster every single year. You get the one-time transfer rule, and that gives some schools and the rest of college athletics an opportunity to sit down and say, okay, how can we address the rest of these things? Well, we probably need to have athletes have a seat at the table. And at that point, if student athletes don't like, the one-time transfer rule and they want to negotiate some different transfer rules, they'd have a seat at the table to do so. So I'm supporting Senator Tuberville's bill, hoping that we ultimately end up with collective bargaining. That's where I'm at.
Well, I'm outvoted.
Let's take that last clip that says you're supporting it.
I am outvoted. Oh, well.
Well, I think that's an indication of where things are going.
Pretty much.
I think the guy who's supporting the PCSA is probably going to be outvoted.
Well, hold on. I mean, before we go, Sam, you'd said you don't think the PCSA is going to pass. Do you think Senator Tuberville's bill is going to get through?
Oh, God, no. Absolutely no chance. Zero chance.
Well, then this entire episode doesn't matter.
We'll clip that too.
That's a great capper. That's a great way to end it. Thanks for spending the last 45 minutes with us. It didn't matter, but
yeah, at least people are educated on the legal reasoning behind why. So, all right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Unilateral Decisions. We'll see you next week.